this week's episode of the Marina Perry podcast. I am your host, Marina Perry, and today is a little solo chat that I wanted to have so that we could unpack a lot of what's really alive at the moment in the collective, and so that we can better understand how we as humans, or why we as humans are behaving as we are. And we're going to drop into a little conversation around projection, perspective, and I suppose ultimately protection, and why, how projection and perspective play a part in protection. And as a result of that, why we are experiencing such division, anxiety, separation, and essentially warring out in the world in between people who would not normally find themselves in conflict with each other. Now, we are experiencing a very unique time in our recent history. And what's unique about this is that we are having our personal values kind of put under pressure. People are experiencing inner conflict about that. And then we are having, because we have differing views and opinions about the best way through this time, we're experiencing a lot of projection, and we're experiencing a lot of judgment, and we're experiencing a lot of fear. And this is problematic because when fear comes into play, what happens, and we know this is on a biological level, on a physiological level, when fear comes into play and we become emotionally elevated in our response, which is what fear is, it's a fight or flight, freeze or appease response to an external stimuli, we are very reduced in our ability to react in behaviors that sit outside of fight or flight responses. So when we are activated in a fear state in our bodies, we tend to react in fight, flight, freeze, or appease. We don't tend to respond in, moderated ways that are using the prefrontal cortex of the brain, because that part of our brain is literally shut down. We can't access rational thought. And we are seeing this quite extensively in the collective. But today, let me be really honest for a second. As someone who is often, asked her opinion as a thought leader in different spaces, I have been attempting to not tell people my thoughts, because I am a believer that sometimes when we look to someone for their thoughts, we can just adopt them as our own. And I have decided to take the approach of educating or continuing to support all of us to understand ourselves better, so we can understand why potentially we're reacting instead of responding, or why potentially we're seeking the solutions we are instead of considering a broader spectrum. But I will say this, that as the craziness in the world continues, and as the polarization escalates, and as the censorship goes through the roof, I am doing an internal assessment on the daily as to whether or not the way I'm choosing to serve really is the best way, or whether I should just speak my truth and have that be the only way that I get to utilize, I suppose, the very limited platforms that are available at this moment in time. So, that's just full disclosure, and that's a dance I'm doing, and I give myself full permission to, at the moment, believe that this is the way forward, and next week to come out with a different approach, because life really is a dance of trial and error. It is us being with the experiences that we're with, and then choosing, how we interact with them. So for right now today, I'm going to take a teaching perspective around what's occurring and why, from the frame of unpacking for you how humans work. And it's very present for the current moment in our history, as I mentioned, but it's an everyday thing in any realm. So I hope that it's helpful to you. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about it in this perspective of the current moment, because why not? That's one of the reasons I'm doing this particular podcast, although perspective and projection are very alive. And as someone who coaches and is very often talking about NLP and submodalities and the unconscious mind and, our human, wirings for safety. I mean, this is stuff that is just, it pertains to every aspect of every day. So let's get clear on a couple of things. As a human being, you have a physical body, you have a mind, a brain, and then you have an energy. And as in an aura, as in a frequency. And, when I speak on sovereignty, I speak about body sovereignty, I speak about mind sovereignty, and I speak about energetic sovereignty. But today we're going to focus particularly on how body sovereignty and mind sovereignty interact. And as I've said many times before, as humans, we have a primary need to stay alive, and thank goodness we do. And that need activates in us a way of working with our internal system that makes sure that we filter the world, the reality, into our inner map of the world to make sense of it. And when we do this through stimulus, through what we hear, what we see, what we feel, and what we learn, when we take that information, that stimulus in, it goes through filters that have been set up in our lives between the ages of 0 to 7. And these filters, whether you're talking from an NLP standpoint, being meta models and meta programs, or whether it's simply just how you as a unique biological being on this planet interpret stimuli. So whether you interpret it, not just visually, kinesthetically, or auditory on an auditory level, but rather even whether you take it through and make it mean good things, or whether you take it through and generally make it mean negative things, whether you're kind of wired more one way than the other. And we all individually are based on our previous experience, right? Whether you tend to generalize, whether you're someone who looks for specificities, everybody is different in their filtration system, okay? Just like your fingerprint, your unconscious mind, there are similarities to the way that we process, but every individual has a unique matrix. Regardless, stimuli comes in and you filter it and you create a map in your inner world, an internal representation of your understanding of the world. And from that internal representation, you then create beliefs, you give it meaning, and based on that meaning, whether that meaning is safe, whether that meaning is loving, whether that meaning is scary, whether that meaning is exciting, then your physiology, your body will respond by creating a state. And the state will either be relaxed and chilled out, or the state will be anxious and worried. So, you can really consider your human body and your human mind working together to essentially filter the life experience that's external to you into an internal experience of life. And this is where, perspective and projection kind of play in together, because perspective is essentially your section of the frame. So if you were watching me on camera right now, then you would see me kind of saying, if the entire, reality of reality is the entirety of the frame of this picture with my head in it and the background in it, and you can see some of my torso, and you can see my head, and you can see a plant, and you can see a background behind me with some hummingbirds on it. Now, perspective is what aspect or shrunk frame of that larger frame are you choosing to have in your perspective? Like, what is the literal visualization aspect of that bigger picture that you're seeing? And so this is where perspective is very important. And when I've spoken about perspective before, this is why we know that when there is a car accident or an incident, they don't just get one person's, eyewitness take on it. They have to get potentially dozens, if not hundreds, to really piece together the full picture. Much like if this whole picture of, the video shot of my head right now was broken into puzzles, getting one piece from one person doesn't tell us much. We really need to get many pieces to see the full picture. But when we are taking in information in life, it is important to know that we do delete, distort, and generalize information. And that is not a flaw in the system. It is an essential aspect of the system. If we really were to take in all of the information, all of the stimuli, it would overwhelm us. It would literally overwhelm us if we were to take in all the sounds, all the sights, and our system had to filter for what's relevant to our survival and what's important to our belonging. It would just, we have a really magnificent system, a brain, and an amazing capacity to process a lot of information, but that would be far too much. So what our brain has learned to do over time is it distorts what's not relevant, much in the same way that if you're driving at high speeds to, get someone safely to the hospital or to escape danger, you're not going to be taking in, the beautiful colors of the leaves as they change color, in the season of autumn as you're speeding past them. You're not going to take in that information. You're going to literally delete that stimulus because it is not prevalent and it does not pertain to the task at hand. Equally, you might distort some information. So if someone says something to you that you find hurtful or that you're unable to process, and distort can not just even be that you're attempting to protect yourself, you might distort information because you can't actually receive it. If you have no comprehension for something, you might reach a cognitive dissonance and literally just distort or swipe straight out, delete it. So we do these things not because we're necessarily broken, but for good reasons. Sometimes there's a necessity to it. Sometimes it's just easier. Let's be honest, the brain is in its own magnificence also looking for efficiency and quick shortcuts, which is why and where that last piece of generalization comes in. And we have to generalize because, again, if we every single time approached a rectangular shaped piece of wood and had to interpret it that it's a door, instead of going, oh, that's a door, now maybe that one over there is a door, and there's a smaller door and a bigger door, we do learn through linkings and associations. And so generalization serves us, except when it doesn't, right? Because there's always two sides to a coin, something I say frequently and often. So deletion, distortion, and generalization are essential, and sometimes they massively constrict the larger frame into a much smaller, limited perspective of the world. And we do this around our identity. I've spoken about this many times. We do this around the fact that you are all things. You can be loud and quiet. You can be playful and serious. You can, this is the work I cover in Whole Womanhood, that we go through life and we make decisions along the way. We give meaning to experiences and stimuli. And then over time, we just edit ourselves down from this wonderfully magnificent, complete rainbow spectrum of beingness into this very potentially black and white, two-dimensional identified reality. Well, I'm serious and I'm quiet and I'm introverted. Well, are you? Or did you just decide you are and you deleted, distorted, and generalized the rest of the information that indicated otherwise? Okay, so let me come back to my point. This is how the brain works. And it's not broken for doing that. It does it for good reason. Except the challenge is when we do it to the detriment of the expansion of our understanding. And that's what we're seeing at the moment in the world. And the reason we're seeing it more in the moment than perhaps normally around general things is because we are living in a soup of fear. And I can't speak as to, I don't know why. I don't know why for sure this is happening. I have, I can make educated guesses as to why fear is being literally utilized as a tool to create compliance. Because it's a very powerful tool to create compliance. Because as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, when you're in a state of fear, your behavioral flexibility, your ability to comprehend and rationalize is reduced. So fear can be a very powerful tool, and it's been used very powerfully throughout our history to elicit desired results by people in power. And right now, because fear is in the collective in ways we haven't really seen it before, and it's not just fear as in scary things are happening in the world, it's fear as in a life or death situation for you. Because of the current situation and what we're being reported on daily, in and out, constantly, is really triggering our sense of our ability to survive. So it goes right into that, primal part of the brain that is literally filtering constantly for fight or flight. So all of our kind of ability to see bigger pictures, our ability to entertain new ideas, our ability to calmly and rationally play with a concept beyond what we currently know, massively reduced. Again, not because we're broken, but because of the way the brain is structured. Primal brain, then limbic brain, and then prefrontal cortex or rational reasoning brain. Those two top layers that got developed much later just get shut down, and we go straight into this primal response. Now, perspective, as I come back to it, is when you are seeing your piece of the larger puzzle. And so the way that we talk about this inside of, the subconscious mind or NLP is we speak about the map not being the territory. So my perspective of the world is not the entirety of the world. Your perspective of the world is not the entirety of what is real in the world, nor is John's, Peter's, Sarah's, or Paul's. But we each carry a fragmented splinter, if you will, of what is potentially true and real out there. Now, Why is this relevant, and how does this, play into projection? Well, because once we have a map, if we were in a relaxed state, we might look at our map, and when someone comes along and says, oh, hey, here's a different piece of the map. Have you checked out this other piece of the map? This piece that, like, again, if we come back to this picture that I'm looking at where it has my head, someone might have a perspective that's just my head, and it's like, wow, all that exists in the world is Marina's head. For someone who's got a shot up into the left of the frame here, they might go, well, actually, no, that's not true. All that exists in this reality is this green leaf. And someone over this side of the screen might go, well, actually, you're both wrong, because all that exists in this reality is a hummingbird. You're crazy. And that's what we're seeing in the world right now. We're seeing people who are looking at their little piece of the much larger puzzle, and they're saying, y'all, this is all that exists. Shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. And the reason that we're saying shut up and you don't know what you're talking about instead of, oh, please tell me more, is because our system is currently in a fear state, and it is saying, I have to be right about what I currently see, know, and believe, because if I am wrong, I will die. That is what is currently occurring because of the heightened fear reaction, and because of, I suppose, the weight or perceived consequence of our current choices. And then what we do is we project. So the person who is, projection is when you take your map and you put it out into the world and you say to everyone else in the world, no, this is exactly what's here. So projection is when you are looking out into the world and seeing only what you currently can see, and then you try to project that reality onto another person. So that's when someone who's looking at my head says, no, it's definitely a head, and someone who's looking at the leaf is saying, no, you're crazy, it's not, it's a leaf. But we're all just seeing fragments of the whole. And if you're listening to this purely on audio, I really hope what I'm trying to say, particularly with the head and the hummingbird, is making sense. There is a video recording that has multiple elements in it, and I'm just really trying to say, if you were looking at a landscape picture that had mountains, trees, lakes, and rivers, any one individual who's pointing out one part of that picture is correct that is there, but it is not the entirety or the truth based on the entire context of what's available. So the content is correct, as in what's in the picture, what they're describing, but inside the context, there is more at play. So when we project our perspective out into the world, that's okay. That's normal. That's what we as humans do. We bring our unique, awarenesses into the world. The trouble lies when we are unwilling to consider other people's. Because if you only see the tree, or you only see the hummingbird, or you only see the lake, or you only see the river, and that river, that lake, or that hummingbird maybe doesn't serve you, right? And it's a tricky metaphor now to map across, right? Because I'm talking about pictures. But let's say you're holding a belief that something is true. And at the moment, in your perspective, that's the only truth that exists. And yet that truth either causes you distress, or causes you, to be living in an anxious reality, or it causes you to make choices that are irreversible, or it causes you to make choices that separate you from a bigger or broader truth, because you literally are only seeing one truth. Or you're not hearing other alternatives. That's when we are cutting ourselves off from true empowerment and true choice. Because one of the things I would love to have land as a result of this conversation we're having today is that if I am choosing something because it is the only thing I see, am I really choosing it, or am I just assuming it's the only option available to me? Because is it true or not true that choice requires 2 possible or 3 or 50 possible options for it to be a genuinely empowered choice? If it's the only thing available, then it just is, right? It's not actually a choice. And further to that, if I'm choosing something because I think that thing will give me something else, then am I really choosing the thing I'm choosing, or am I actually choosing what's on the other side of that thing? I'm choosing the value that I hold. And that was probably a very complex thing to follow. So let me break this down. If someone chooses to be in a relationship with someone because they really cannot stand the idea of being alone, so they cannot fathom loneliness and solitude, so they choose to be in relationship with someone. My question is, are they really choosing that person, or are they simply choosing not to be alone? This is an important distinction around choice, because at the moment, some of us in our collective are choosing things, not because we're choosing that thing, but because we're choosing what we think that thing will give us. Yeah, we're choosing something that we value. And for others who aren't prepared to make that choice, what we're experiencing is a conflict in our values. And if I just speak in layman's terms for anyone not following along, some people are choosing to have the vaccine with full consent. They've done research on both sides of the coin. They're choosing to have the vaccine. That is a choice. If they have done full research into negative side effects, they've done research into known side effects, they've done research into what is in that injection, they've done research into what that would do potentially long term, although we don't yet know, right? Because only time can tell you what long-term results are for anything. Then that person has made an informed consent and they have made a choice. If, however, someone is choosing the vaccine because they are being told that without it they cannot travel, they will not have their normal civil liberties, that person, in my opinion, is not actually choosing the vaccine. They are choosing that which they value, which is travel and their civil liberties. And that is a very different reality to choosing with informed consent and choosing the thing. So, coming back to my point, if we close ourselves down, which we are doing a little bit, all of us, not everyone, but for the most part, many of us, we're in a fear response. We want to feel safe. And the way that we go to feel safe is we want to feel safe about what we've already decided, because then we don't have to worry that we've, made mistakes or stuffed up ourselves. And we also want to be safe in the belonging of our society, which means we generally want to err on the side of the majority because it feels safer there. There's more people hanging out there. And because we're so used to not trusting ourselves, there is this kind of, I speak about this a lot when I speak about sovereignty. We've outsourced our self-trust, we've outsourced our knowing to people that we think know better. And so when there's lots of them standing over there, there is an internal desire, a biological desire to go and stand with them. And it feels safer. And I understand that. And the challenge that we have is when we project a very limited view onto other people and we wonder why they're not seeing the world the same way, it comes back to what I spoke about earlier. They're literally either seeing something else in that landscape picture, or they also started seeing just the hummingbird or just the face or just the tree or just the mountain or just the lake. And then they went and they explored more of the territory. And because they explored more of the territory, their map looks different. And therefore the options on their menu look different. And therefore their choices are going to potentially show up differently. Now, in addition to literally just your perspective and your projection of your perspective and literally the frame of your reality, there's so much more that goes into why we decide what we decide and give things the meaning that we give them. And this is based on your entire experience to date. If you are someone who has had experiences with your health where the traditional medical realms did not support your healing, or you learned things where you ended up having to go outside the spectrum of the traditional medical realms, then you might be a person who is comfortable doing that. You might be a person who is comfortable saying, well, I hear that and I see that, but you know what I found to be true in the past in these other ways is XYZ. So your experience and your previously laid beliefs factor into your perspective right now, and therefore your choices right now. Whereas someone, for instance, who may have had situations in their life where every time they experienced sickness went to the conventional medical solution and it solved it, they have had those beliefs affirmed and confirmed again and again, and therefore to strengthen those beliefs. So then they might make choices in the now with that pre-framed, pre-existing, I suppose codes or rules that support a particular perspective of the current map. I mentioned this in in a Instagram post just recently, and the point that I was trying to make is, at the moment we see a lot of people going, I don't understand why you're believing that way, and if you believe that way, we can't be friends, right? And one thing I really would love all of us to know is that if we were that person, we would believe what they believe. And if we can get to that level of awareness about how we're wired and why we make the choices that we make, it softens this need to fight with one another. Because if I had literally had all the life experiences you had, if I was someone who watched the nightly news and I didn't think mainstream media had a narrative, if I didn't know that, or if I didn't believe that pharmaceutical companies, were trying to make money and didn't always have our best interests at heart, then the way that you would be viewing the current reality would be very different to someone who has full faith, in it, or versus someone who doesn't, is my point. And more to the point, that if you had their entire reality up until now, you would, for sure, believe what they believe. We are not a person with a belief. We are a living, breathing body mind that has gone through many experiences, made decisions, and then sought to be right about them again and again and again and again through the filtration system of taking stimulus in the territory, the reality of the world, filtering it through our perspective into a biased reality inside of us. And that's simply the truth of it. However, and this is kind of where I'm big on growth, right? You guys hear me talk about this all the time. I speak to growth getters inside of all of our programs. Growth is simply expanding your map and doing that courageously, stepping into the unknown. And when you have more things on your map, look, I'm not going to lie, that can sometimes make your decisions far more complex because you're seeing more content inside that context. You can see mountains, rivers, and lakes, and then you're like, do I want a mountain, a river, or lake? What is better, a mountain, river, or lake? But at least you know there are mountains, rivers, and lakes in the reality of that picture. If you, and this is where I do believe on some level, ignorance is bliss. If you only see mountains, then the decision to choose or to state mountain is the way becomes much easier because you don't see the other things that are present on the map. Now, does it mean they're not present? Does it mean they're not as true? No, it just means that your frame at the moment doesn't allow for them. And this is where closed-mindedness can feel like the safest cocoon. To be closed-minded is really comfortable. It's super comfortable, but it definitely is not. It's not where truth lies. It is where your truth lies, but it's not where truth with a capital T, as in the collective, all-seeing, isness of truth lies. And equally, this is why we resist it, because it's easy to make a decision when there's only really one choice to make. And when we feel that's the right one, it's great. But are you really making a choice if you're not yet willing or able to entertain other alternatives or other perspectives? I think it's Aristotle who was quoted as saying, whether he did or not, but he said, the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. And that's a quote that I have always valued, and it's something that I have always sought to embody myself. It's like, let me hear your perspective, and as a coach, I literally have to work with people who have completely different belief structures and experiential frames to me. And my job is simply to support them to have more empowered frames or to expand them in ways that support them to have what they want in life, right? Because that's the bigger truth of all of this, outside of just this current narrative right now, is that your frame is limiting your experience of life. And if you want something that you don't yet currently have, then your current frame is not permitting it, which means you have a belief or an internal conflict between your unconscious and your conscious mind that says no. That's not safe for us, that's not allowed, we have a resistance, or that has been made wrong in the system. And so the way that I as a coach help my clients to have what they want in life is we go inwards, not outwards. Note that, guys, we don't go outwards and fight with reality. We go inwards to permit the map to expand, to include more of what is actually already available. And so because I do this work day in and day out, I can see why we are where we are in the greater collective. I can see why people don't want to hear other people's perspectives. I can see why others are baffled as to why people are seeing it the way they're seeing it. And yet I can completely see why every individual with a completely different perspective is seeing it the way they're seeing it, because that's what their map allows for. Now, I am not here to tell you to think anything about the current reality. I'm really not. I'm so pro-choice. Your life and your life's purpose and your path is yours to unfold. Your choices will have consequences. All of our choices have consequences. I've taught my children this since the day they were old enough to understand that you have a superpower of choice. You get to use it every day. You get to decide who you be every day. And there will be consequences to your choice that can be positive and negative. It's simply a reality. Cause and effect exists in this domain, in this dimension. And so all I implore and invite you to consider is, what is your current frame? And then feel deeper into that. Why do I feel, am I open to considering the alternative, perhaps, is the next question. And if you're not, if you feel your whole system tense around that, that's a fear response. That's okay. So then I invite you to query, what is it that I am afraid will happen if I consider this alternative? Because you are just lovingly protecting yourself inside of your frame. We all do that. But it doesn't mean, and this is, I suppose, the big takeaway, it doesn't mean that the perspective held by another is actually wrong. It just means it's impermissible. That's a new word. I don't think impermissible is a word. It's not admissible at the moment through your current filters to be allowed to be a considered or real perspective. But to be clear, I'm going to say it again, it doesn't mean it isn't. Just because I believe something to be so doesn't make it true. It makes it true for me. Does that make sense? Which is why it feels like truth, which is why people will fight to the death over their beliefs. Because a belief, the etymology of the word belief is to hold dear. And we choose to hold dear those things that we have made meaning of, the decisions we have decided with the beliefs that we hold, so that we hold them dear to us because it's what keeps us safe. It's what keeps us in knowing. And the definition of a growth getter, the definition of an expanded mind is a willingness to sit in the unknown. It does require deep sovereignty and safety with self to journey onto the map of another person, or as Aristotle said, to entertain a thought or an idea and not necessarily accept it. That requires deep self-attunement and discernment. Can I sit and listen with an open mind, a truly open mind, to someone else's perspective, a completely opposing idea to mine? Can I let it wash over me without resisting it off immediately, without rejecting it because I don't like how it feels immediately? Can I just be with it? Can I even listen to more of that? And can I then make a decision that's right for me? Because that's what we need in the world right now. We need you in your body sovereignty to know that your body is yours to choose what to put into it. And despite the narratives and the push to tell you what's right, you get to choose for yourself. It's such an interesting time, and it's so emotional. And not everyone is experiencing it in the same way, because right now in particular, it is important to note, and you could resist this as truth, but I will certainly say that as someone who prides herself on deep research, and I have an incredibly inquiring mind, hence why I have a school of growth. But the reason I say that is I am very open to and have deep experience in trying on ideas, dancing with things, and then over time going, I'm a kind of a mad scientist around my life as a whole, right? It's like I love to test and try, even on a physiological level, nutrition plans, eating ways. I test and try it, and then I take the feedback, and then I move forward from there with what I have decided to be truth for me, knowing that there's truth in all things. And so if we can kind of acknowledge that at the moment, traditional media channels, mainstream media for sure, and mainstream media talks about the news, the television, and even social media now, we are having a mega, on levels that I do know some people are not yet attuned to, censorship occurring. And it was actually only the censorship that had me go and do the depth of research that I did 18 months ago. It was only because I saw really intelligent people share very scientifically backed thoughts, ideas, studies, that I then went to share that information with other people, only to find that that information had been censored, which got me curious, because it wasn't radical, it wasn't antagonistic, it was just a perspective. And this is my point. I'm very pro multiple perspectives, because the more perspectives that we have, the fuller the picture we truly see. And I really encourage you, if you are being if you are being encouraged to continually see only one piece of a puzzle, and someone is actively saying to you, don't look over there, don't look at that, get curious as to why. Get curious as to why. Because right now, as I look at the screen that is recording me as I speak, I can see that hummingbird, I can see that leaf, and I can see my face and torso. And all of those things are present. They're all there. It's a yes and conversation. Life is always mostly a yes and conversation. Yes, there's a leaf, and yes, there's a face, and yes, there's a hummingbird. And right now, yes, there's a virus, and yes, there are vaccines, and yes, there are treatments that are not being discussed in all forums, although I've heard many, many hours of many wise doctors talk about them, and yet that's not what's being covered in the news. Why is that? And why is it that we're not really focused on health when this is supposed to be something that is, affecting our health? Why are we not talking about basic health? Why are we going straight to fear responses? Why? Because the majority of people are not attuned to activating their wholeness. They're not attuned to seeking and finding safety in themselves. They're not attuned to keeping their mind open in times of stress. These are skills that need to be learned. So my greatest desire, prayer, my highest hope for us as a collective is that we remember our humanity, and that we remember that Bob, Peter, Jane, Paul all get the sovereign right to choose what's right for them. And that choice comes from having options, and that options come from broadening our perspectives from what we think we know, and we just sit with what we don't think is potentially true, or essentially what we don't know that we don't know. If you're someone who listens to my podcast prior to now, how many times have you learned something that until that moment in time you didn't know? We're constantly on a learning journey. And even as a collective, we're learning more and more and more. And I'm fine for us to make mistakes and to learn from them and to decide, wow, what I did a month ago. In fact, I think that's the bravest thing that any human can do, is to look at a choice we've already made in the past and go, wow, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't do that again. Can we be brave enough to open ourselves to more of the conversation? Can we be brave enough to sit with someone who holds a completely different perspective to us? And instead of seeking to be right and to reject it and to prove them wrong and to speak over them and to shut them down just because it triggers so much discomfort in us, can we open our perspective enough just to entertain it? And then literally, even if we do not agree, which is your right, it is your right. But even if we do not agree, can we go, cool, I still can understand how and why you believe that. And I will leave you in peace with your beliefs, because just like me, you are entitled to them. My prayer is that we get to that place. And beyond that, I think it was Hitler who said that if you tell the public a big enough lie enough, loud enough and often enough, they will believe it. And this is true inside of your head, in the microcosm of you as an individual and the macrocosm of us as a collective. What we hear on repeat without any opposing or contradictory or expansive perspective, we will take to believe is true, because repetition does that in the brain. In the same way that if you wake up every day and you say, I'm fat and I'm ugly, I'm fat and I'm ugly, I'm fat and I'm ugly, you will begin to see that. Now, it is not necessarily the truth of your reality. People all around you could look at you and say, you're beautiful, you're stunning. And yet in your head, that will be the truth, because it's all you've ever told yourself. In the same way that you might tell yourself you're terrible with money, and you will create that reality. What we hear enough on repeat. And this is one of the reasons that I say turn off social media, even if it is just for your sanity, to switch off your fear and fight and flight response to that propaganda and that programming of fear. Because if you are in a heightened state of fear, you cannot drop in. You cannot feel your body's wisdom. You cannot find safety to even consider an alternative. Yeah, that's really all I wanted to talk about today, is perspective, how it gets created in our systems, and understanding that it's our sovereign right as humans to journey in life and either keep the same frame, hold it, and knowing that in doing that, you are perpetuating essentially a limited frame of the world, and yet it will feel very safe. So I have no judgments on you for doing that, but also knowing that that is not always the truth of the full piece of the picture, the puzzle, or reality. And so if that's where you're at today, great. And if this conversation even kind of gets you to go, okay, you know what, I hear what Marina's saying, I'm going to try that on. I'm going to sit with people who have different opinions. I'm going to ask them why. I'm going to get curious. I'm going to be courageous with my curiosity. And then I still might choose to stay where I am for now. And can we even hold our beliefs and our choices as flexible? So right now, I know where I stand personally on some issues for me and my body. And I also hold space for me to change my perspective as time evolves, because we will learn and new things will come to light, new awarenesses, and I'm open to them. I'm open to them. Are you? That's the question that I want to leave you with. Are you open to new perspectives? And if not, dive within and see why not. Generally, it'll be a safety, a protective, issue. It would probably require that you have to challenge some of your beliefs. And that can be a scary thing to do, but I can tell you, as someone who helps people completely shift, change, and evolve their belief structures, because again, beliefs are just a decision you've decided to make right and that you choose to hold dear. It is not true. It's not actually true with a capital T, but it feels true. So if you want help feeling into your beliefs, and this is well beyond even just this conversation about the collective, if you have beliefs that you know are limiting you, these can be moved, shifted, modified, and upgraded. That is what I do on the daily for my clients. So if you want help with that, reach out. And just on that note, you and I do not have to agree on all of life's things for me to be a support to you. Yeah. I see you, I am you, I love you. I am truly just here so that you may stand in your sovereignty, make choices that are truly yours, that do not come from a space of conditioning or coercion. And it takes really strong inner knowing, inner reverence, inner safety to make tough choices that are not popular and that are in the face of coercion right now. So if hearing this, you are someone who is choosing something very different to their family or something different to the people in your community, I just want to say I salute you and I see you, because I know the inner fortitude that takes. And everyone on every side of this conversation at the moment is dealing with some level of pressure, some level of projection. And can we acknowledge that is what is alive right now, and just hold love and compassion for ourselves and for everyone else? It is definitely a complex and multifaceted conversation, and I certainly by no means meant to solve any of our problems today. I simply wanted to join the conversation with some insights. If this podcast has been triggering, then that's okay. If you didn't enjoy some of the things I said, if learning about some of my perspectives has upset you, I invite you to sit with that for yourself. I think that could be wonderful, and it could teach you something about yourself for yourself. And if some of the things I've said have resonated and you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, thanks, Em, let me know. Nothing would give me greater joy than knowing that this conversation has given you insight or broadened your mind in some way. And of course, if you'd like me to unpack any aspect of this further, then likewise, direct message me, email me, tag me. Yeah, reach out. I would really love to know how I can be of either more effective service or a deepening of service at this time. What do you need? And if I'm able to, I'll speak into it, or I'll go find an expert and have them as a guest. So what would you like to hear more of? Let me know. All right. Stay amazing, stay safe, and stay inquisitive. Until next week, I love you.